Part 17. Bath. Perhaps one of the oddest jobs I ever undertook was to search for the body of a goddess. Many relics of the Roman occupation have been discovered at Bath, under and in the vicinity of the celebrated Pump Room. During the 18th century this was the resort of England's rank and fashion, who went there each year to drink the water from the hot mineral spring and bathe in the same saline water in the beautiful old Roman bath. Some years ago workmen uncovered the remains of a temple of Minerva near the Pump Room and found a beautiful bronze head of the goddess among the debris. This was placed on a pedestal in one of the corridors running round the Pump Room, but the body to which it belonged had not been found. So I went to Bath to try to find it. A suite of rooms had been reserved for me in one of the best hotels, where everything was done for my comfort. There was always a cheerful fire burning in the sitting room and the view from the windows was beautiful. Both the manager and manageress were there to meet me when I arrived and I was asked to have tea with them before I went up to my suite. The former was on the Pump Room committee and was anxious to know how I proposed to set about my task. I was equally anxious to hear what he could tell me about the finding of the head of the goddess. Lying before the fire was a big Dalmatian, named Regina. After inspecting me carefully she came to the conclusion that I was worthy of her friendship and lay down with her head on my feet. But, when the tea arrived, she put a heavy paw on my lap to inform me that she liked hot scones as much as I did. At the time I never dreamt that Regina would play her part in the drama of the lost body of the goddess, as indeed she eventually did. After tea, I was taken by the manager to the Pump Room to see Minerva's head. It was a really beautiful thing, but very big and heavy. It was obvious that the body must be an enormous mass of metal of tremendous weight and it seemed strange that no trace of it had been discovered. I was then introduced to another member of the committee who was in charge of the search and would accompany me everywhere. The first difficulty was how to get a sample of the goddess to work with. To find any other part of the statue, I ought to have had a little piece of the bronze to keep me tuned into it and enable me to make a contact. As it was, I had nothing to guide me. I had to make do with a handkerchief, which I kept rubbing over the head to get the vibration, which meant continually returning to the corridor of the Pump Room. I began by exploring the area where the temple had been discovered, but could find nothing which corresponded to the vibrations from the handkerchief, although I worked in bigger and bigger circles all around it. Then I explored the cellars and basements below the Pump Room and the adjacent building but got nothing except a continual pull in one direction. In following this, I was led to one of the main streets where the pull was quite strong and definite. As there was a continual stream of traffic passing it was impossible for me to work, so it was decided to invoke the aid of the police. It was arranged that 2 policemen should be stationed on the street at midnight, to keep traffic off the area where I wished to work. Accordingly, at midnight a strange procession marched to the appointed spot. It was led by a man carrying the head of the goddess, followed by another carrying the pedestal. A third man carried measuring gear. Then followed 2 members of the committee, both highly respected and sober citizens. I brought up the rear, clad in slacks and my red Indian coat in which I always work, as it is light and warm and has many pockets, but which undoubtedly added a touch of the pantomime to the whole proceeding. One policeman was stout, stolid and middle-aged and his face blankly expressionless during the whole time we were engaged in our mysterious search, although it was extremely unlikely that he had ever been detailed for such a strange duty before. The other was a powerful young man, obviously new to his work, who took a keen interest in all that was going on, while standing stolidly at his appointed post. First of all the pedestal was placed exactly in the middle of the chosen area and on it was set the head of the goddess. I then walked slowly up to the pedestal and passed my hands over the head, to get its vibrations. A full moon was shining and I must have looked not unlike an ancient priestess performing a votive offering to the goddess. I started working, having previously arranged with both members of the committee that, if I found anything, I would drag my heel along the road and they would follow and chalk my markings. Very soon I discovered something round and began to draw with my heel. The 2 elderly committeemen went down on their knees and set to work with their chalk. When I had finished, Marking out the round object they became most excited for, although it might not be the body of the goddess, it was very much the shape of a shield. They begged me to go on and see what else I could find. By this time quite a crowd had gathered and was being held back by the two policemen. I heard one man say in a loud voice, "What in the world is all this, Sergeant? A circus, or madhouse or what?" To which the stolid policeman replied, "I couldn't say, I'm sure, sir. I've no idea myself. I did hear someone say that they was looking for a corpse. Expect you will see all about it in the paper anyway, sir," and he relapsed into his stolid silence. I began again, followed by the two men on their knees. I marked out a long sort of pole, which was probably a spear. While doing so, I came behind the young policeman and asked him to move, which made him jump about 2 feet into the air. Obviously the whole uncanny business had been too much for him. He might have dealt with a couple of drunks without turning a hair, but when it came to guarding witches and lunatics it was another matter. Then the procession reformed itself, led by the head of the goddess with myself in the rear. After I had gravely thanked both policemen, we left the scene of our labors and the traffic resumed its interrupted flow. On reaching the hotel at about 1:30 a.m., the manager insisted that I and the committeeman who escorted me should have some hot soup before we went to bed. It was awaiting us in his sitting room. He opened the door and I walked in. Regina was lying in front of the fire. She took one look at me and, in a flash, she made a leap at my throat. Fortunately, her mistress was able to grab her by the tail and the manager seized her by the collar and dragged her out of the room. He returned to see whether I was all right and swore that he would give Regina the worst hiding that she had ever had in her life, but I begged him not to do so. I explained that it was sheer terror that had made her attack me and that many other dogs had behaved in the same way after I had been divining. I have no idea what it is that affects dogs or what it is that they feel or see, but it scares them so terribly that on the instant they become like savage wild animals instead of gentle, domestic pets. In Regina's case it was more than strange, because she had been so friendly beforehand. Wherever I go, I always have all dogs shut up before I start divining. This time I forgot and it nearly ended in disaster. The city fathers met next day to discuss the question of digging up the main street to recover the shield and spear. They decided that they would have granted permission if the body of the statue had been found, but since it was only a shield and spear, it must be withheld. So the beautiful bodiless head of the goddess still rests on its pedestal in the historic pump room at Bath, without even a shield or spear to keep her company. End of part 17.